Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking a massive paradigm shift when it comes to property risk. We've pulled some really fantastic insights from a comprehensive guide by Pocket, all about vacant land liability insurance here in Australia. Now, if you own undeveloped land, maybe you've got a property sitting between tenants, or even just an empty paddock somewhere, you might actually think you have absolutely zero legal exposure. But today, we're going to look at why that is a total myth and how owning literally nothing but dirt can still leave you incredibly vulnerable.
Right out of the gate, I want to acknowledge what you're probably thinking right now. It's just an empty block. Why on earth would I insure it? And honestly, it's a completely fair question. It's the absolute most common reaction landowners have. I mean, if you aren't actually doing anything with the land, insuring it kind of feels like paying for a ghost, right? You're likely assuming that because nobody is using it, it must be completely safe. But as we're about to see, that assumption, it's actually the most dangerous one you can make.
So there's this really stark contrast between human logic and legal logic here. Human logic looks at an empty block and sees, well, an empty, safe block. But the law sees an unmanaged hazard. And that word, unmanaged, is exactly where your liability originates. The very thing that makes vacant land feel so safe to you, the fact that nobody's there, is exactly what makes it so risky. Think about it. There's no one there to spot a dead tree about to fall, or clear away dumped rubble, or fix a broken fence. It's unmanaged. And because it's unmanaged, it's totally unpredictable.
Let's move to Section 1, the law of negligence. Why doing nothing isn't a defense.
Now, I want to be super clear right off the bat. What we're talking about today isn't some clever insurance sales tactic. This is grounded in objective Australian common law. Ownership carries liability. Period. Standing before a judge and saying, hey, I wasn't doing anything with the property, simply is not a valid legal defense anymore. Let's take a quick look at how the law actually got here, because it's a pretty fascinating bit of legal history. Before 1987, your duty of care as a landowner heavily depended on whether the person on your land was an invitee, a licensee, or just a trespasser. If they were trespassing, your duty to them was pretty minimal. But then we got the 1987 High Court decision in Australian Safeway Stores Pty Ltd versus Zaluzna. This historic case completely flipped the script. It threw out all those old categories. Post-1987, occupier's liability is governed by the ordinary law of negligence. So someone being a trespasser doesn't automatically act as a get-out-of-jail-free card for you anymore.
So the crucial point we really need to focus on is the legal standard we're left with today, reasonably foreseeable. The courts are basically just going to ask one question. Did the occupier exercise reasonable care to avoid foreseeable risks of injury? And when it comes to vacant land, foreseeability is almost always there. If your block is in a suburban area or near a school or just doesn't have a fence around it, it is completely foreseeable that local kids might use it as a shortcut or someone might just wander on. And if they get hurt on your uneven ground or trip on some debris, the law says you absolutely should have anticipated that.
Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, I'll just slap a no trespassing sign on the fence and call it a day. A sign is nice to have, sure, but it does not act as a magic legal shield against liability. Why? Well, for one, the specific hazards usually aren't adequately described on a basic sign. And more importantly, children can't always read or really comprehend them anyway. If access to the land is still physically easy to achieve, or the sign is, miles away from the actual hazard, a court is very likely to find that you didn't take reasonably practicable steps to reduce the risk.
Section 2, Anatomy of a Claim. The true cost of inaction.
So, we've talked a lot about abstract legal theory. But what actually happens in the real world when an incident occurs on an empty block? Let's walk through the escalating headache of a claim, because this is how it usually plays out. Step 1, the demand letter. An injured person's lawyer sends you a letter claiming compensation for medical bills, lost income, maybe pain and suffering. Then comes Step 2, and this is where the hidden costs really bite you: investigation and legal fees. Even if you think the claim is entirely baseless, a total cash grab, you still have to pay solicitors, barristers, and experts to investigate and defend you. You don't have to lose a claim to be severely out of pocket, you just have to be named in one. And finally, Step 3, resolution, which usually means stressful negotiations, lengthy mediations, or frankly, massive payouts.
Let's ground all of this in a specific, highly relatable scenario: $75,000. Imagine local kids use your vacant, unfenced block as a shortcut on their way to school every morning. One day, one of them trips over some hidden rubble in the long grass and breaks a leg. The parents sue you for failing to secure the site. Between your legal defense, their medical expenses, and the compensation if you're found liable, a claim exactly like this can easily hit $75,000. And all of this over a block of dirt you might never even visit.
Or consider this number,
$45,000. Here's a scenario that proves hazards can happen even without anyone actively visiting or trespassing on the property at all. Imagine a scorching hot summer day. A grass fire randomly starts on your unmanaged dry vegetation. That fire spreads right over the property line and completely destroys your neighbor's fence and storage shed. You could be staring down the barrel of a $45,000 claim for property damage, cleanup costs, and legal defense simply because you didn't manage the land.
Which brings us to Section 3, protecting your asset, the shield of coverage.
So, the big question, how do we actually fix this? This is where vacant land liability insurance comes in as your ultimate safeguard against the unpredictable nature of an empty block. It specifically covers your public liability for injury or property damage. That includes those trespasser incidents we talked about and natural hazards like spreading grass fires or falling dead trees. Crucially, it pays your legal defense costs, even for completely groundless claims. But keep in mind, this is not property insurance for your own assets. It's not going to cover damage to your own fences or sheds, and it immediately excludes employee injuries, running any kind of business on the land, or any construction activities whatsoever.
When you go to get this coverage, you're going to see limits offered, usually around $5, $10, or $20 million. Now, $20 million is the recommended default, especially if your block is in a suburban or urban area. Why so high? I know it sounds like a massive number. But here's the thing. While a quiet block might have a lower likelihood of an incident happening, the size of a potential claim doesn't change. If a child suffers a permanent disability on your land, when you combine lifetime care payouts, lost future earning capacity, and multi-year legal costs, that can easily approach or even exceed $5 million. A $20 million limit handles those absolute worst-case scenarios for a surprisingly modest difference in your premium.
So who exactly needs to put this in place? Honestly, it's a pretty wide net. Whether you're an investor just holding a block, a developer waiting on council approval, an owner sitting on a property between tenants, a land banker, a farmer with inactive paddocks, or maybe you're an executor dealing with a deceased estate, you have exposure. And here is a really important takeaway. If you have an existing home or landlord insurance policy, it almost never covers a separately held vacant block. You almost always need a standalone policy specifically for that vacant land.
Section 4. The transition. When empty becomes active.
There is a very crucial caveat to this coverage, and timing absolutely matters here. Vacant land liability insurance is incredibly specific to inactive land. The very moment the first sod is turned, the second demolition begins, or any physical site preparation starts, at that exact second, your vacant land insurance ends. It is no longer the right cover. You have to immediately transition to contract works insurance. Whether you arrange it yourself or your licensed builder holds it, you just cannot rely on vacant land insurance the moment your land becomes a construction site.
Which leaves us with this final question to ponder today. Is your empty block truly empty of risk? We've seen today that under Australian law, doing literally nothing is actually an action that carries heavy liability. The emptiness itself is what invites the risk. So if you're holding on to a piece of vacant land, take a moment today to check your legal exposure. Double-check you aren't just relying on an old home policy, and seriously consider getting that vital shield of coverage in place. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.